Alice was the kind of girl who seemed to bring warmth wherever she went. With a kind smile and gentle hands, she spent her days helping people, always eager to lighten someone's load. Whether it was volunteering at the local shelter, comforting friends, or simply being present for strangers in need, Alice was full of life and love. But that all changed the day she discovered her curse. It began subtly, like the faintest whisper in the back of her mind. One evening, while Alice was tending to an elderly woman at the hospital, her vision blurred and the woman's face twisted into something grotesque. In a flash, Alice saw the woman slumped over in her bed, her skin pale, her breath gone. Startled, Alice shook her head, dismissing it as a trick of the mind, but the image lingered, dark and cold. The next morning, the woman was found dead. At first, Alice convinced herself it was a coincidence, but then it happened again. One afternoon, she was helping a man across the street when her vision flickered, showing him sprawled on the asphalt, blood pooling around his motionless body. Terrified, she backed away. The man stared at her, confused. 2 days later, she saw his face on the evening news, victim of a tragic car accident. Alice couldn't deny it anymore. She had a power, one that felt more like a curse. Every time she met someone, their death revealed itself to her. No matter how much she tried to avoid it, she saw their final moments, often brutal, sometimes slow, but always inevitable. The visions grew more vivid, more violent. They no longer came only when she met someone new. They haunted her dreams, flooded her mind at random. She began to see the deaths of people she loved over and over in gruesome detail. Her parents, her best friend, even the children she helped at the orphanage, they were all doomed, and she knew it. Desperation filled Alice. She wanted to help, to stop these fates from coming true. But every time she tried, the outcomes only seemed to accelerate. She told her best friend, Sarah, not to take a late shift at work one night after seeing her face burnt in a fiery explosion, but Sarah dismissed it, laughing nervously, thinking Alice was just being overprotective. That same night, the restaurant caught fire. Sarah didn't make it out. The more Alice tried to prevent death, the more it clung to her. She stopped meeting people, stopped helping, stopped smiling. She was afraid of what she might see, afraid that she was the reason these tragedies were happening. Her life became a nightmare, each day marked by the horrifying certainty of death's arrival. It wasn't long before Alice began to question whether she was the one causing these deaths. After all, they seemed to happen only after she saw them. Was her mere presence sealing people's fates? The thought gnawed at her, consuming her mind until she could hardly sleep, hardly eat. The Alice who had once been full of life and love was now hollow, her heart burdened by the weight of the inevitable. One evening in her darkest hour, Alice caught her own reflection in the mirror and her blood ran cold. Her own death stared back at her, cold, lifeless eyes. Her body crumpled on the floor, blood seeping from her wrists. The scene was unmistakable. But this time, Alice wasn't afraid. As she picked up the razor blade, she whispered to herself, "Maybe if I'm gone, the visions will stop. Maybe the deaths will end." She was tired of seeing the people she cared about die, tired of carrying the burden alone. But as the blood began to flow, a horrifying realization gripped her. In that final moment, she saw the deaths of everyone who would find her body. Her parents, the police officers, even the paramedics, all of them, their lives tangled in the curse she'd tried so desperately to escape. Alice had thought her death might bring peace, but in the end, it only unleashed a new wave of doom. Death wasn't something she could outrun or outwit. It was her shadow, and it would follow her even in the afterlife. Alice's curse didn't end with her. It passed on to those who dared to know her, to care for her, to mourn her. Because once you see death, it never lets you go.